Welcome to The Media in the Mix, the only podcast produced and hosted by the School of Communication at American University. Join us as we create a safe space to explore topics and communication at the intersection of social justice, tech, innovation, and pop culture. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking to Zachary Gradishar. Zachary Gradishar is a recent alumni of American University, class of 2022, where he received his bachelor's in public relations and strategic communications and a minor in marketing. Zach was adopted from an orphanage in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, when he was just under a year old and grew up in Chicago, Illinois, before moving to Washington, D.C. for college. Following his graduation this past May, he moved to sunny Los Angeles to pursue a career in the entertainment industry. This past summer, Zach completed a 16-week postgraduate internship, his ninth internship within the last 4 years, with Searchlight Pictures Film Studio at the Walt Disney Company as a PR/publicity intern, where he supported one of the national publicity teams. Before starting his internship with Searchlight, Zach participated in American University's School of Communications LA Intensive Program as part of the summer 2022 cohort. The LA Intensive Program is one of our experiential learning programs here at American University. Zach also launched his very own podcast this summer called Let's Chat with Zach, where he chats with different guests each week about various topics from navigating life post graduation to what it's like to work in the entertainment industry and so much more. Zach, thank you so much for being here. What an accomplished resume already.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on today's episode. I'm so grateful to be here.
I want to ask you, so all the way from Ethiopia to Chicago and then DC, and now you're living in LA.
Yeah.
How's life been post graduation? And be honest with us. Is it what you expected?
So yeah, life after graduation is definitely rough. I appreciate transparency, and I'm gonna keep it 100 with you.
Love that.
It's definitely been rough. And for me, I feel like it's been a big reality check as someone who's always planning ahead and wanting to know like what's next, and like I'm in this point in my life where I don't necessarily know what's next. I'm not in school where, okay, I'm in the fall semester, I can think about what I'm going to intern in the spring and then summer and so forth. Whereas now it's like first of all, I'm competing with everyone else who just graduated, and it's just like getting used to the fact that it's life is not as easy as I thought it was in college. And I thought for selfish reasons I was going to have an advantage, just being someone who came out of college with not only a degree but 9 internships. I was a president of AUPRSSA. I was in a fraternity. I was doing community service, maintains dean's list, like all these things that people had told me, "Oh, Zach, you're gonna be fine." Because I always, no matter what my track record is, like I've always been very like, I don't want to say worried, but maybe anxious about just the future in general. And I was like that back at AU, but people were constantly telling me that I was being dramatic, or thinking about it too much. Like, Zach, you're gonna be fine. Like, you don't need to worry. Like, you've done all this stuff in college. Like, you're so employable. Yet I'm getting rejections after rejections, and I'm currently unemployed in LA. So that's definitely been really hard to just like grasp. And I think for me, it's really important to remember like I am not like alone in this process. I think a lot of times because I've talked to my parents like so much since I've been out here, and cried to my mom a lot, just like everything post grad. And people have been telling me like, Zach, like you're not alone. There's so many other kids like my age that just graduated that are experiencing the same things. And I think that kind of makes me feel a little bit better that I'm not alone in this process. But at the same time, I am physically alone. I live in North Hollywood, California, in a studio apartment by myself. Came out here by myself, and I have like one cousin out here who's who's like almost 40. She has her own life, own job, own
Right.
world. And like it's great to have her there for like support. And she's like 5 minutes away from me, so I can go over
Mhm.
whenever I want to. But besides that, like I don't have any other family out here. I didn't come out here with any friends. So I think for me, like that's also played a toll into it as well, in addition to just struggling finding the job, but like also just doing that alone and not having the comfort of my friends around me, which again was another reality check because, coming from a college environment where I could just go on the quad and meet up with a friend, or I can just go down the hallway in the dorms or
Yeah.
my apartment building. Even if people didn't live in my apartment building, my apartment was like 5-10 minute walk to campus. So inevitably I was surrounded by people that I knew and my friends, and so I never really had to like worry. But yeah, coming out here has been a whole shift, and I think for me, it's definitely been challenging. And at this point, I'm just taking it day by day and trying to keep a positive mindset just for my mental health, because you can definitely get into a certain mindset that can lead you in a negative way. I feel like if you don't be consistent and persevere and just try to remind yourself that I came out here to LA by myself at 21, with an internship with Disney. Like that in and of itself was an accomplishment for sure. But I feel like for me, I didn't really like it. It always takes a second for me to have that kind of stuff sink in, and for other people to tell me like, Zach, like you have to realize like not everyone can do this like you, like. And being out here now for 5 months, like I have realized that getting out here to LA physically is like the biggest step in this whole process just to begin with. So many people take years to come out here, whether it be just like financial reasons or just like job reasons, or personal or professional goals that they have. So I that gives me more comfort in realizing like, okay, I'm out here, like I'm physically out here, so the big thing is done. And now just the dauntingness of finding a job in this crazy competitive environment. And I feel like the entertainment industry is, and I learned this really quickly, is not only is it a very competitive industry, but like everyone in LA, like you don't realize it. I didn't realize it because living in Chicago and then living in DC, but living in LA where entertainment is like everywhere, like it's so crazy to think that, like I don't know, for some reason I thought that, okay, it's everywhere. If I'm in LA, like I should have an easier chance of finding a job. I can like physically go to places and connect with people in the city. But I think that's also made it hard because what I've learned is to make it in this industry is it's all about who you know. And for me, coming from, yes, I came out to LA, but I'm still literally building my network. My parents are doctors. I have no family in the industry.
Right.
So I feel like even though I tell myself I have a leg up being out here, it's
Mhm.
definitely, the job is not done. So with all that said, I am so grateful that I'm out here, and I realize that not everyone can necessarily do this right out of college. And I'm so thankful to have the support from my parents and my family and friends. And I'm excited to see what the future holds for me out here for sure.
Absolutely. And there's like a few things that I think are super important that you touched on. And one of them being you already did the hard part, which is that move. That
Yeah.
move alone, a lot of people hesitate to do that. Now that you're there, you can finally focus on, okay, what do I need to do to kind of grow here? But another
Hmm.
thing you touched on, which I thought was very interesting because I've gone through this as well, is that fine line between I need to have a complete plan and then also, no, don't worry, you'll be fine. And especially the entertainment industry, I mean, it is something else. It is an industry unlike any other industry, to be
Yeah.
honest. But I found that kind of creating small plans and just checking those off, kind of building off of those, are really helpful when you're going through an industry like this. Because it's like you said, by the way, my dad's a doctor as well. So and my brother's a doctor. So there seems to be a little bit more of like a streamlined path that you take. You know what you got to do next to get to where you need to get to next.
Exactly. Yeah.
And with this industry, it's so just fickle. And like you honestly might one year end up doing one thing and then the next year you're like, oh, instead of video I love sound, or I love, that it's just like your world can change depending on the opportunities you get. But I think that's the beauty of it. So that's why I started to learn like smaller plans, I think, create like bigger successes. When you start to learn like what you like and what you don't like, I think you have a little bit more of a clearer path. I think a lot of people go through that when they want to enter this industry. But I think that goes into our next question pretty well of what is your advice, considering you had a lot of internships that I have no doubt got you a leg up in that, resume career. And it's tough for graduating classes of like 2020, 2021, 2022. You guys graduated through a pandemic. So
Mhm.
not only is the entertainment industry insanely competitive, but it is now at a higher level of competitiveness because the opportunities have like slowly decreased. I don't want
Yeah.
to say that it's like a drastic because the industry is picking back up and people are getting back
Mhm.
into it. But for a while, those opportunities were very rare. What's your advice to those people who maybe think, oh, do I have to start from the bottom? Like, what's the value there? Because we
Yeah.
know there is.
Well, that's so funny you say that because I had that same mindset. So, I guess if we backtrack for a second, so I graduated this past May. So, at the beginning of this year, January to I want to say like mid March, right until our spring break. So, in that like 2.5 month period, I've probably applied to like over 100 different positions within the entertainment industry. And in addition, in that time period, have had 20 plus informational interviews with people in the industry that I made through an internship I did the summer prior with the Television Academy Foundation, which was a dream internship in and of itself. And through that process, 99.9 of the positions I was applying to were entry level full time positions, assistants, coordinator roles, whatever. It wasn't until probably end of February, March when I realized, like there was a stagnant in this process. And I remember this one call with my dad, and I was just saying like, because at this point I'd had 8 internships, right? And I told myself that I didn't like I didn't want another internship and that I deserved a full-time job. And I hope that doesn't make me sound selfish, but I just thought that
Not at
I
all.
was done. Like I told myself not everyone, was doing it like me in a way. And there wasn't a semester or summer during the last 4 years of college where I was not working. I used those internships as an alternate way to, gain experience within the world of PR. But at that time, I told myself that I deserved a full time job. And then my dad, it wasn't until the conversation I had with my dad, and he was just like, Zach, you're in no position to be picky. For example, like I have no connections out there. I'm not out there. And he was essentially right. But it was a hard thing to take in just because of like, I thought that I had a leg up and I thought I could use these 8 experiences and equate them to, world life experiences. Cause back to what you were saying, like all my internships were jobs, like full-time jobs. I was getting a paycheck. I can point to projects and things that I've done and the connections I made, the skills that I've obtained. And so I thought it, benefited me in that way. And so after the call with my dad, I applied to, I think 2 or 3, no more than 3 internships. One of them was with Disney or Searchlight at Disney, and that's it. Like the rest were just full-time jobs. And then once spring break came around, like I was just completely burnt out. Because within all this, I had an internship that semester. I was leading a whole organization as chapter president, plus my fraternity where I was doing community service. And then leading up to graduation, right? And so I was already like crazy busy. I don't Half the time I don't know why I did all this. I guess just to answer your question point blank, yes. Like take an internship, take an assistant position, take anything cuz at the end of the day if you can get an experience where you are learning and you are making connections, like those are the two most important things that I feel like can benefit you in the future. And then for me, I just looked back at it and I was like, at the end of the day, I just need something to get me out to LA. Because in all these informational interviews with people that didn't necessarily know each other, they were all basically saying the same sentiment of, there's only so much you can do being in DC on the other side of the country and not being in LA. And they were very honest with me, which I appreciate that like it's going to be harder when you're not in LA. And not only do you have that aspect, but you have no like you're just making it harder for yourself basically. And so with that mindset, I was like, okay, I just need something to get me to LA. And then when I was applying to these internships, it made me feel better of getting something because I had 8 internships before. Like I felt like I was overqualified for an internship. And by the grace of God, I got the internship with Searchlight. And that was the only and I am so grateful that I had that conversation with my dad and I listened to him because that was the only thing I heard back from. That process to get that internship was grueling for literally no reason. I had 5 interviews in within 10 days. The like while packing up my apartment and graduating, and I got the offer 3 days before I walked the stage. Like it was just like
Wow.
absolutely insane. But that internship got me out here. And so that
Yeah.
was an exciting thing. And I felt like, okay, I can rest. Like, and it was paid. All my
Hmm.
internships that I've done were paid, whether that be I needed money to live in DC, or they
Right.
were just paid. And then it was just like hitting the ground running because I graduated May 7th, and then our the LA intensive program started like 10 days later. And but before I flew out to LA for the LA intensive, I had to pack up my apartment, drive back home to Chicago, and
Wow.
do all that kind of stuff. And then I didn't even drive my car; I shipped my car. It was like a really busy time. It was like hitting the ground running. And then
Yeah.
LA intensive happened, and then I had like 72 hours, and then my internship started. So I had like no time in between, but I just knew that I had something out here, even though it was a temporary thing. It it was something that, and I knew I could make the most of it. So I was very grateful.
100%. It's like I said, small plans, you
Yeah.
kind of just like tick those off and then you go from there. And also, I love that you said you had like 5 interviews because that also just goes to show how competitive the internships are. I mean, everyone knows where they need to be starting. If it is like I just graduated, I moved to LA. By the way, I know people who are in their 30s that have moved to LA, decided to start in the industry and they're a PA or they're doing some type of internship. It's like it really is just that starting point. And you never know who you're going to meet. You never know who's going to walk in through your office, No matter where you are, whatever studio it is, whoever you're meeting with, like you just never know who you're going to run into, who you're going to have that conversation with. And I always say just like have those conversations. It doesn't need to be work related. In fact, I tend to well, I've learned that the ones that aren't work related are the ones people remember. So sometimes if you just strike up a conversation and just make friends. And you mentioned the LA intensive a few times, so I definitely want to go into that.
Yes.
For everybody that doesn't know, any students, prospective students, our experiential learning programs at AU are basically in collaboration with the AU Career Center and the Office of Development and Alumni Relations. The School of Communications, SOC, connects current students and recent graduates with AU alumni, parents, and professionals working in the field of communications. So they offer site visits, panel discussions, workshops, networking events, interviews, meetings, productions, leading to meaningful relationships and successful careers. And basically, that is what Zach and I have both completed the LA intensive. We go to LA for a week. We meet with studios, producers, directors. I mean, anyone really. In the industry, and we have a lot of AU alumni come by where we're staying, so we get to talk to them one on one. They give us advice. It's a lot of fun, and it really, really gives you an insight into what life there is going to be like, what the people around you are going to be like, what the fast paced, or rather the pace of it, usually very fast paced, or slow pace when you're stuck in traffic for like 2 hours. So
Yeah.
there's different vibes to LA. But was it helpful to you, just for anybody even thinking about doing the program? What did you gain from it? What did you learn? Basically, what would students be able to gain from participating in the LA intensive?
Yeah. So first thing, it's definitely helpful. Point blank. Like I feel like I am honored that I was able to be a part of this summer's cohort, just because I knew the value of the program. And I had applied previously for the summer 2020, so fall 2019 I applied. Obviously that didn't happen, COVID. And so I'm so grateful that I was able to actually do it in my last possible time, I guess. But yeah, it was definitely so helpful for people that are interested, curious, or planning on pursuing careers within the entertainment industry. And I say that because Sarah Minka-Fish and this experimental learning department in the program, they go out of their way to make sure that students in this program take as much away as they can from it as possible. And every single day, like we had like an itinerary of who we were going to meet, what we were going to do. And I think what was really important was the program was very diverse in terms of the opportunities that they allowed us to explore, and it pertained to different interests. So for example, we met with people that were in development, for those that have interests in, developing scripts and feature films and that kind of stuff. We listened to people more on like the business side. So we had someone from like Apple TV come talk to us about like the business of running a studio. And then we had people from agencies and people that were into like graphic design and did like movie posters, entertainment PR people. So it was kind of, getting the attention of like everyone in my cohort had different ideas of what they want to do within the industry, which I feel like was so great. And it made it even better because I, for myself, was able to learn about other people in my cohort and what they wanted to do. And a lot of them were recent grads from the AU MFA program. So they were either in the process of producing their short film, or they had just done that. So it was really cool to get them exposed to people that in the industry that have gone through this process and basically have done what they wanted to do. And likewise for me and other people in the cohort.
Hmm.
And I think there was a lot of just like interactive opportunities too. We went on a lot of like site visits and studio tours, which was very fun, but also just like the exposure was so good. We were able to talk one on one to studio heads, which I feel like is not an easy thing to do. Not everyone can say that. And inevitably, all these people can become part of our network essentially. And so it was a week of just intense fun and exposure. And for me, for someone who knew I wanted to move out to LA, and I've been talking about that since I was like 5 or 6 years old. And so this was very, very exciting for me. And I know that it's a very competitive program, and they only select a few number of people for the cohort. And so I tried to make the most of it as possible. I got the LA. I knew I was gonna be part of the LA intensive program before I got my internship. There
Hmm.
was like a month in between. So by the time I went through the program, I knew I had my internship. So it made me even more excited because once the LA intensive program ended, I was like on this rush of just like excitement and like wanting to make go out and create a name for myself in the industry. And I'm so happy
Hmm.
that I was like already out here and jumped right into my internship, as opposed to going back to DC, or if I wasn't a senior or recent grad, um and like going through another year of school or whatnot, then coming back out here. Because I feel like this, and going back to what you said, like everyone's plans are different and their
Hmm.
outcomes are different, and that's totally okay. But for me in particular, as someone that's always been talking about it, I'm so glad and fortunate that I did the program when I did it as opposed to earlier. Because I feel like if I did it earlier and like had 2 more years of college left, I would have felt that I wouldn't necessarily get as much out of the program as possible, just because it's harder to stay in contact with people when you're not out here and you're not like, you know, doing it.
I agree with that. I think it's like if you don't know or you do know, either way, do it because it's just such a good learning experience. It's like at the end of the day, it's not even so much about LA as it is like getting to know yourself in this industry and kind of what path you would like to take. We saw so many people, we met so many people that had these very niche jobs that I was like, I did not even realize that was a thing. So that was the other cool part is if you got a dream and you think there's no like that's a pipe dream, there's no way that's actually a thing. It could be. It could be in
Yeah.
this industry because I feel like they need a job for everybody, you know?
Yeah. And then also one thing I wanted to just mention too was I didn't realize this. And I probably don't think I would have unless I went through the program, but I didn't realize how many people within the broader AU community are out here. And I feel like that I'm so grateful that SOC has this program.
Yeah.
And I feel like there should be even like another aspect to it, because I was like so shocked that how many people that are out here from that are in LA that went to AU, graduated from AU, and like are doing it. And I feel like people, and I get it, DC is a very politically driven city, and
Mhm.
a lot of students there um, are, have a specific goal in terms of in the world of, politics and government and that kind of stuff, which is makes sense. It's DC. But at the same time, I feel like it'd be so great for students that, because this cohort was what, like 11, 12 of us. And you know, there's probably so many more kids that applied. So I feel like it would be so beneficial to have some other affiliate of this program or some other way to draw students to this world outside of DC because I was talking about this to another student in the cohort because we were just like we were just so like shocked that there's so
Mm-hmm.
many people from AU that are out here, and it just honestly blew my mind. And it's funny because like being out here, like a lot of studios, and they tell you a lot of students that they take in terms of like internships, entry level stuff, they're seeing students from USC, UCLA, LMU, which
Right.
makes sense. It's LA. And they
Yeah.
all said like it was so refreshing to have students come from elsewhere. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know. I 100% am so glad that I did this program because I learned so much more about just the AU community out here and that there is one out here. So yeah, definitely. You should definitely do it if you're interested. You won't regret it.
I love that. There is going to be an informational session as well in October and November for anyone listening. So stay tuned for that. We will be advertising that on our SOC social media, so you can find all the information there. But Zach, last thing I want to talk to you about is the podcast. So let's
Yes.
chat with Zach. I love that. My background is very much podcast production heavy, so I love that you started your own podcast. Can you tell us some of number one? What motivated you to go the podcast route, and also what are some rewarding aspects and what are some challenging aspects of that if anyone's thinking of launching their own?
Yeah, so I've been wanting to do this for a while now, and I think for me I always gave myself excuses, whether that be, I'm in school, I have internships, I have other responsibilities, I don't have time to
Yeah.
do a podcast. And I also just thought like, oh, like it's like I also thought it was like a daunting experience a little bit just to like start a podcast from the ground up. Like I don't have a huge amount of followers. You know what I mean? Like I don't have that huge following, and I feel like a lot of the podcasts because I'm a lover of podcasts, and I like watching like the video podcasts as well
Mm-hmm.
within the world of like influencers, and all of them started when they started their podcast had like millions or thousands of followers. So I feel like that was also kind of intimidating because I guess they kind of already had an audience to begin with and I didn't. And I also thought like I'm too young, like I'm only a student, like all of these things just adding up and eventually maybe not follow through with it.
Right.
And then it wasn't until this summer when I, moved to LA, started my internship and my life out here, and I was just like, you know what? Forget it. Like, let me just do it. Like, I have nothing to lose, and I've always been someone that's very creative, and I feel like this project has been such an outlet for me in so many ways. In terms of like just simplicity, like I started this podcast as a way to not necessarily reconnect but just catch up with friends and people within my network because like I said, coming out to LA alone, 21, starting an internship, and my internship was full time, and
Mm-hmm.
I was working 60 plus hours a week. It was just like so crazy. So now I think about it, I don't know how I even had the time to do this, but but I did
That
it, and
always
I'm so
happens. Yeah.
glad that I did because it's been one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had. And I did my due diligence. I
Mm-hmm.
as an consumer of podcasts, I already had like a foundational concept of what a podcast is
Right.
and the purpose of a podcast. But I really wanted to, I told myself if I was going to do this, I wanted to create a project that I could be proud of, a podcast I could be proud of. And
Mm-hmm.
so I did the research and looked into ways to start a podcast, tips for beginners, in terms of equipment,
Mm-hmm.
and whether how much I wanted to invest into my podcast setup, so to speak. And
Right.
I, as a recent graduate, I am not. I don't have a lot of money in the bank, and so I just invested into a microphone that came with. Thank God for Amazon. It came with like a
Yes.
stand and like a whole cord setup or whatever.
Oh yeah.
So thankful for that. And then from there, I just started brainstorming because the first thing I needed was a name. Like, what am I going to call the podcast, and what's going to be my purpose for the podcast?
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, I really had to think and reflect because I think what is a topic I can talk about week after week on a consistent basis for hopefully years to come, without getting drained or burnt out or what have you. And so I have this like whole document that I started making in end of June, early July, and I came up with "Let's Chat with Zach" just because I liked the way that it sounded. I thought it had a certain ring to it, and then it
Hmm.
kind of encompassed what I wanted the podcast to be about. Given this is a weekly podcast where I have guests on, different guests each week, and we talk about a variety of different topics, and just like the simplicity of chatting with me, Zach, and just building up from there, and thinking that moving forward, I can do weekly episodes and not about anything and everything, and not stay tied down to a specific topic and garner to a specific audience, because I felt like that would be very limiting for me. And as someone that's just starting this whole process, I didn't want to be put in a box already. I just wanted to let everything flow and flow naturally. And um I'm so grateful that I was able to do this, and I stuck with it, because it's definitely been challenging trying to do this while doing a full-time job with my internship and working the overtime that I did, because the entertainment industry, no matter what you're doing, it's grueling and long hours, whether you're a PA, assistant, intern, or an exec. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, it's just how the industry is. And I learned that very quickly and very abruptly. And so every little free time I had, I would sit down, plan my podcast, curate the guest list and the topics I wanted to talk about. And as I started this podcast, I was very intentional with who I wanted to bring on as guests. And like I said, I don't have a huge following, so but at the same time, I felt like a lot of people I have in my network, both socially and professionally, I was surrounded by amazing people and inspiring people and accomplished individuals. And I figured, why not use this podcast as a platform to share their stories and learn more about their world and what they do. And I can create an entertaining podcast, but at the same time, like, educate myself on topics that
Right.
I may not be as informed about as I would like. And so with that, like, I was very intentional with the guests and the topic, and how that lined up with each other. I have my fourth episode releasing this Sunday, and
That's awesome.
I think another thing for me that was really important to realize is consistency. Consistency is key.
Yes.
I also think it's important to note that I didn't come into this project, right away, like, I'm gonna monetize everything. Like, this is gonna be another stream of revenue for me. Like, I didn't come with that intention. And I feel like that's very important, because in this world of content creators and all that kind of stuff, like, I feel like the fun of everything and creating content and doing what people actually love kind of gets stripped away when you wrap money and
Yes.
monetization and business, all of that. And so
It just doesn't really feel like a passion project anymore, you
exactly,
know?
exactly.
Yeah.
I told myself, I just, no matter what happens, like, I'm excited to see how it flourishes and grows. But in terms of just starting it off, I just wanted to be really authentic and just have be very conversational. And I was not worried about that, as most of the guests are my friends or people within my network that I've talked to before, and the things that we're talking about, we have talked about in real life. And
Yes.
so I thought that eased the process a little bit.
It
Yeah,
sounds amazing. And I love that you said, like, choosing something, kind of having this long-term goal of, like, I won't get burnt out, or it's something that I can talk more about the more experience I gain, if you like talking about
exactly.
the industry, that's pretty cool. I always think of it like script writing, like you have to know your ending.
Yeah.
You kind of can't be like, I'm just gonna take it episode by episode. It's kind of like you have to know a little bit of where you're going. But that's amazing. And I want to, Zach said, every Sunday episodes drop. You can find them on Apple and Spotify podcast platforms. And Zach, thank you so much for being here. This was so fun. I'm glad we got to chat. I'm glad you kind of gave everyone an idea of what's to come. If anyone's thinking of moving out to LA, thinking about taking the LA intensive or the New York intensive, we do have East Coast, West Coast options. But thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course, anytime. And for everyone listening, you could check out our bi weekly episodes dropping on Wednesdays on Anchor, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you'd like to support this podcast and the School of Communication, go to giving.american.edu to donate now. And that's a wrap.